Alright, in this video we're going to take a look at the different viewing options that we have within Cinema 4D R16. This will be very consistent with other versions of Cinema 4D as well, including Cinema 4D Lite. So when you first open up Cinema 4D, you're typically going to be in what's called the perspective view. So you'll see here the perspective view is controlled by these three controls up in the upper right hand corner of the viewport. So you have the pan tool, the zoom, which should really be looked at as a dolly, not a zoom, and the rotate tool. So if I click on the first icon here, we can see I can pan around within the scene. The second icon allows me to dolly in and out. And then of course the rotate tool allows me to rotate in a three-dimensional view. The fourth icon expands us into the default 4-up view, which allows us to take a look at multiple views, including the viewport with our 3D perspective view, and then on other areas we'll have our orthographic views, including the top view, the front view, and the right view. Notice that these are all controlled independently as far as zooming and panning. Now in the case of the orthographic views, these are two-dimensional views, so rotating is only on a 2D rotation. Now, to expand any view once you've opened the 4-up view, all you have to do is click on that same icon for the view, and it will pull up within the viewport. And then you can quickly click back on it to go back to your 4-up view, and then again click on whatever view you want to maximize. Now these different views can be accessed through shortcut keys as well. The F1 key will take you to our 3D perspective view. The F2 key will automatically take us to the top view. The F3 key will take us to the right view. And the F4 key will take us to the front view. Now within all these views, as you can see here, we have different types of display settings. So within each of these menus for our different views, we have options that we can change. So if you click on the display settings, you'll see this one is set to garage shading as a default. If I wanted, for example, to be able to see the lines of the mesh and see the subdivision of our mesh, you can click on the garage shading with lines, and now you'll get a better appreciation for the geometry. And this is very useful when doing modeling, for example. There are other options as well, including quick shading, which is a little bit faster than garage shading as far as calculating, and of course the lines option, and then constant shading, which is a little bit cheaper than our quick shading. You can see you start to lose some of the detail, but you get the overall color of your objects. And some of these views are very handy in animation when you're trying to get a decent playback in real time of perhaps a character rig such as this. We have other options as well, including hidden lines. So now you can see the textures are all gone. And lines, which then adds this as a transparent object, so you can see all the mesh throughout the model. Now, the same can be set for our other views. So for example, if we are working in one of these views such as the side view and I wanted to be able to see the actual coloration of the model, I can easily turn on those same shading options within any of our views. Now, let's talk about 3D camera manipulation within our perspective view. So as I said, we have the icons up here. There are also shortcut keys that allow us to do these same functions. So, for example, if you are to option left click within your viewport, or Alt and click and drag on a PC, you'll see that you can rotate around your view. If you option click and then press the middle mouse button, you can pan around, and if you option right click, you'll zoom in and out. The same controls can be used with the 1, 2, and 3 key. So again, the 1 key would pan, the 2 key would zoom, and the 3 key would rotate. These keyboard shortcuts are much handier than having to always go back up to our control keys within the viewport. Some other viewport commands that we have are our rendering options for rendering right within the viewport. So if you press Command R or Control R on a PC at any time, you can render a current view. Now, when you have all 4 views up, or any kind of configuration with multiple views, the last viewport that you've clicked on, the last camera that you've accessed, will then take over that render. So, for example, if I zoom out of my right view and then click the render button up here, or press Command R, it's going to render this view because this is the last view that I actually worked with. The last bit we'll look at as far as maneuvering around within your views is the navigation mode for our camera. So when I go back to my perspective view and go to cameras, you'll see under the navigation menu there are several options for how our camera, our virtual camera, actually maneuvers around within our viewport. The cursor mode, which is probably on by default, is set to control the rotation axis based on the last place you've clicked with the cursor. The center mode always looks at the center of our view to control the rotation of the camera and the other manipulation options. The object mode allows you to select an object, and then that object becomes the center of the rotation. This is very handy for animation and modeling, where you really need to stay focused on whatever it is you're working on. So by setting this up in object mode and then rotating around, you're always keeping that object in frame and in shot. Lastly, you have the camera mode, which just takes the view that you have and then sets the actual camera position as the rotation point and maneuvering point. This is the most obviously like having a real camera to work with, and is handy for doing things like testing out perhaps a pan or a move across of a camera within a scene, but is typically not one that's helpful when you're actually working on any kind of animation or modeling process, as it doesn't really keep anything in frame that you may be working on. A couple of last options we'll look at here. Within the view menu of the viewport, you have some framing options, including frame all, which would frame everything that's in your scene, from lights to background objects to geometry. You have frame geometry, which would only frame obviously the geometry that's in your scene, so in this case the T-Rex model. Frame default, which takes you back to your initial camera view. This can be handy if you get a little turned upside down and don't know where you are within a scene. And then options for frame selected elements, which could actually be points and polygon selections. and then frame selected objects, which looks at what objects are selected in your scene. Then we have our options, level of detail. So again, if your computer is struggling to keep up with the geometry and textures that are in lighting that's in your scene, you can adjust this to a lower value. A stereoscopic workflow. Oops. You have enhanced OpenGL with different sub-options for what parts of the OpenGL will be activated at any time. Then you have some of the other options for modeling backface culling, which doesn't calculate any geometry that's not seen. And some of the other options here, including whether it recognizes tags, textures. So if I turn textures off, you can see. So again, some of this is handy when trying to limit how much stuff the software is having to keep track of, or if you're just looking at things like perhaps how shadows are being cast upon the geometry. Some of these options come in real handy with that. Last, you have X-ray, which enables X-ray on any object you have selected in your scene. So this is very good for staging objects as well as modeling when you're trying to get things lined up, and sometimes it can be difficult when you have to keep rotating around geometry to see other aspects of your scene. The last option we'll look at here is the configure, and you'll see this is really handy when using things like background images to help build a model. You can come into options, configure, you can go to back, you can load images within your workspace. You have other options as well, as including border color and border opacity for the tinted border command. What this does, let me go back to my perspective view, and you can see the tinted border here. It's not too noticeable because it's only at 10% opacity. If I turn that up, we can actually see what's in frame within the camera. Now this, by default, is set to a 4:3 ratio. If I set this to another color, sometimes you can get better results as far as actually seeing what's in frame and what's not. This is important when you get into building your actual scenes and getting ready to create animation and the staging part of the process. You'll typically want to go ahead and set up your camera output size. So if you're going to do full HD, you might want to set that up here, and that way you can see what's in frame for your animation. That will keep you from wasting time perhaps on animating objects that won't be in scene. It will certainly help you in the staging process to see what's going to be visible in the final render. The last option here that we'll look at is the filter commands. Now this filter menu, kind of like the options, allows you to disable and enable certain types of objects and elements within your scene. So for example, if I didn't want to see any lights within the scene, I could come in, turn off lights, and now they won't be visible in my scene. So you can see how the shape goes on and off just by clicking on that. And sometimes it's good to clear out some of these other things when you're doing animation or staging and you don't want to see all the different icons and placeholders for all the elements in your scene. One last quick note about framing. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in this video that along with our framing options within the view command for frame geometry, we talked about frame selected elements, frame selected objects. So if I actually click on any geometry, if I press the O key as an object, it will frame that object. And then if I want to take it to another level, I can, if I'm in a component mode such as points, and select any points and press the S key, I can actually zoom right into a selection. So keep that in mind when you're working on modeling or other things such as weighting and other things that really need you to get in close to your models and to be able to get exact selections or vertex paintings, things of that nature. This will really come in handy.